start, Ravi. You can start from
Okay.
your end, introduce yourself, and then I will start, and I will start my question and the stuff. Yes.
My name is Ravi Bajpai. I'm a multimedia journalist. Over the last 16 years as a journalist, I have worked for print newspapers and for digital. So I kind of work across formats. I write, I take pictures, I take videos. I'm right now working with China Daily in Hong Kong as a managing multimedia producer. And back in India, my my last job before coming to Hong Kong was with Hindustan Times, where I was the head of video for the digital company, and I set up the digital video operations for Hindustan Times. And before that, before I moved to the digital space and video, I was a print journalist for 10 years. I used to write and edit, but for most part of those 10 years, I was reporting on crime, Delhi police, and on the Delhi government. So I covered politics for 5 years, state politics. Uh, and then I moved to digital completely. So I've been in the digital space for about 8 years now. And about 3 years back, I was chosen as the International Center for Journalist Fellow, and my fellowship was for multimedia journalism and innovation in digital storytelling. And we used to work. So, International Center for Journalists, or ICFJ, is a Washington D.C. based nonprofit that works on beefing up journalism and the media landscape around the world, especially in the developing countries. So my job was to work pro bono for a lot of the Indian newsrooms and consult with them on, strategy for innovative storytelling on digital platforms.
Uh, I'm Muhammad Aminuzzaman, and now I am working as a senior lecturer at private university, University of Liberal Arts, under the Department of Media Studies and Journalism Department. So before that, I was a photographer and working as a photographer for 10 years at Drick Picture Library Limited, and also doing some multimedia story for the BBC. And with that, I also do teaching in Patshala. And before that, I complete my photography 3 years course from the Patshala. So you can say that I'm a photographer mainly, and with the photography, and I do my multimedia story and storytelling stuff with the videography. And now I am mostly I work as a teacher right now at ULab and Patshala both. So from this point, as you mentioned that you start working with as a journalist, and I like to ask my first question that as you start your career as a journalist, how you shift from the writing journalism to the multimedia reporter, and why you do these things, why you choose this option.
Yeah. Um, I started with, I was always based in Delhi, India's capital, as a journalist. And I worked with quite a few newspapers for the first 10 years in my career. I was with Hindustan Times, that is one of India's leading English national newspapers. Then I worked with um, a newspaper that the India Today group brought out. It was called Mail Today. And then my last print job was with the Indian Express. That's again it's a very reputed English national newspapers in India. And for most part of those 10 years, I was reporting. And I also headed bureaus of reporters. But law and order and politics over this time. And then at about, say, after 10 years, in about 2011, I was kind of, well, I'll just be honest, I was kind of getting bored because as a print journalist, as a reporter, all I was doing was, I mean, and I liked it, to be honest, but it kind of became repetitive because I was, going to meet my sources and officials, finding stories, coming back and filing them. And then I realized that, no matter how much I rose in terms of my position and experience and designation within print journalism, I would always, effectively be doing the same thing, going out, reporting, coming back and filing. And I kind of didn't see myself doing that for the longer in the long run. So I started to think about, what more I can do. And then I came across a fantastic course that was being run out of Philippines, Manila by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Foundation. Uh, and I enrolled in that. And thankfully, it was a course for working journalists. So I did not have to take a career break. It was mostly online with 2 on-campus visits to Manila, to the campus. So that course kind of opened my eyes. And this was about the time, you've got to remember, in 2013, when newsrooms, at least in India, actually in South Asia, didn't really have any positions of, a multimedia journalist. So the concept wasn't there. You were either a broadcast journalist or you were a print journalist. In fact, till about actually only a year after I completed my postgraduate diploma in multimedia journalism from Philippines, did I see a non-profit organization actually advertise for the post of a multimedia journalist. Until that time, no mainstream newspapers or TV companies were actually even advertising for a multimedia journalist. So it was a big shift. I moved. So in order to get into multimedia journalism, I actually had to leave active journalism after 10 years, and I moved to a nonprofit for about a year, Center for Science and Environment. It was a nonprofit, but my role really there was, as a multimedia journalist, shoot videos and manage their websites, and also look at their social media. I stayed there for a year. Then I was kind of getting bored there because it was mostly, I was just sitting in the office. So then I moved back to mainstream newsrooms. And so, I mean, well, just to sum it up, I wanted to change. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be doing the same routine all my life. And then when I did the course, I kind of liked, and till also, I have to say that till that time, I had never used a DSLR camera. So the first time I used a DSLR camera was actually in my multimedia course after 10 years of doing print reporting. And then I kind of took to it, and then I liked it. And then I moved completely to video.
With these things, you were bored, but in the present time, uh, the reporter need to learn this multimedia
Yeah,
techniques due to the technological
yeah.
differences. And how do you, uh, m- uh, how would you connect with this requirement right now for the reporter?
Yes. Um, I was an early mover in this space. There was a time when most news organizations didn't realize the power of online video. And at that time, there was no requirement for journalists to do video, but I saw that change very quickly. Within 2 years, all newsrooms were talking about training their existing reporters, be it print or broadcast, to be able to shoot themselves and to train them in, basic sequencing and video storytelling. And that change happened very quickly. I remember when I moved back to a mainstream newsroom, the same newsroom actually where I used to work as a print journalist, I went back as a video journalist. And I remember my colleagues were kind of, back in 2013, when I shifted, it wasn't a requirement for journalists to be able to do video. But I saw that change very quickly. Within 2 years, the whole newsroom was talking about training all their journalists and upskilling them to do digital video. Um, and I remember my first job as a video journalist was in the same newsroom where I used to be a print reporter. And I remember my colleagues who were still doing print journalism then used to be very amused why I had left a good print career to go to online. Because digital journalism at that time wasn't considered serious journalism, right? It was just considered a clerical job of copy pasting stories from newspapers on the website. And so but like I said, that changed very quickly. Within 2 or 3 years, the newsroom went into a full transition. And Hindustan Times actually was one of the first news organizations in India who actually redid their whole newsroom. The whole floor was redone for convergence and digital first. And so that was a time when all journalists were then asked to take mandatory training for shooting videos and understanding what a video script is, what's the structure, and the management started to sensitize them to, what is um, online news and why do we need to do that. And then all the journalists were kind of trained in social media. But the transition wasn't overnight. It took many years, and I believe many of these organizations are still kind of undergoing that phase where they're transforming their print or broadcast, traditional journalists, single platform journalists into being multimedia journalists. But I think I would say we are in 2021, right? At about 2016, it kind of became essential for all single platform journalists to start doing digital first journalism and starting to shoot video, at least basic video on their phones. And at Hindustan Times, we got a mobile editor whose job was to train about 750 journalists in shooting on their mobile phones and editing on their mobile phones. This was also the time when this whole mobile filming and editing was just coming up. So there were a lot of new apps, a lot of new things being tested. People had different kind of phones. Not all apps worked on all operating systems. So this was really a time of experimentation. But I think it seeped into the company's DNA, and in fact, the whole industry's DNA that journalists need to be doing their journalism for more than one platform. And there was a huge need to upskill all these journalists, and it became imperative to actually to learn more and do more for all the journalists.
So in that point, I just want to know from you that how would you deal with the new technologies and new equipments when you think that next time I have to go, do a story with this new camera or new light or new sound. That means every time uh, in a market you will find a new type of device. So how do
Yeah.
you cope up with these technologies?
So I mean, you have to look at that question in two ways. One is for first time video producers like print journalists. Let's say you're a writer and now you want to take up shooting. That phase, I've left that phase a long time back. I can answer that question though. But the other point is, of course, now these days, now that I've done video for so many years, how do I look at technology and changing technologies? Which one do you want me to answer? The one that where in the initial days when I shifted from print to online and doing video, or
Print to
now?
online. Now I like to know the for this course that print to online, that how you cope up with this.
Okay, okay, all right. Well, I have to say when I took up my course and I was still, so I remember when I enrolled in the course, I was still reporting for the newspaper, and that was the first time I think I started to shoot with I bought a Canon 550D with your regular kit lens and one tripod, and I bought a Zoom H1 recorder. I didn't have a lav mic then, and I remember that, of course, the kit lens was not good enough because I used to see videos online, and then I used to go out to shoot, and I did not get similar images. They were not as good, as clear. And then the more you shoot, the more you realize that you can't rely on just one standard focal length. You need longer lenses, you need wide lenses, you need medium lenses. And that was a time when I actually um, I had to thank my photo editor at that time for the newspaper, because he actually gave me some of his own lenses to try. So I could use his 7200 high-end Canon lenses. So thankfully, I didn't have to rent lenses, or I didn't have to make do with just the standard 18 to 55 kit lens. I could experiment with these new lenses. Um, I have to say that learning the camera and understanding the functions wasn't so difficult. But that said, I've been doing video for 8 years now. Even till date, I'm learning something new every day. So the first thing I think in hindsight, I'd like to say is that when you're trying to shift from print to digital, don't expect to master the technology on day one, right? And it's not just the technology, right? You have to bear in mind that doing a good video uh, involves a lot of things, right? You need to understand what a video story structure is. What's the beginning, middle, and end? What are the elements? How will your story progress? What is the story arc? And then you've got to think about the equipment you're using. And so at that time, I think for me, learning the basics of the camera it took me about 5 to 6 months to become comfortable with the camera. because I wasn't shooting every day. I was still working a full day job. So I was shooting part-time, like, half an hour, 1 hour every day. And then, of course, simultaneously, I was also learning the editing software, and I started with Adobe Premiere. And so I'd say it took me about a year to get comfortable doing everything. Um, well, if you've never used a camera, then understanding the camera is very critical. Otherwise, I would have just said that, first understand what the video story arc is. What does it take? Because there are so many technicalities. I remember even small things take you time to learn. I was trying to shoot a busy traffic scene at a junction in Delhi, and I was using a 7200 heavy lens with my small camera. Canon 550 is a very light camera, right? The lens is heavier than the camera, and we were told that you have to fix the tripod base plate on the camera body, and I kept doing that, and but the lens was heavy, so even if there was slight wind, the lens would shake, and every time I would come back, my footage was shaky, and I couldn't figure out it. I shot many times for many days, and I couldn't figure out what happened. But then I spoke to my teachers, and they said, "Are you putting the base plate on the body or the lens? Because for the long lens, you need to put the base plate on the lens and not the body." So I figured that out, like, after many days of shooting, failing, getting frustrated. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's going to be a gradual process. So you might get frustrated very quickly. That you might it the whole it might seem very daunting. That what's the point? I've done 10 years in print journalism. People know me. It's sort of I'm comfortable with this medium, and why should I take the trouble of learning something that is so difficult? I'm not saying it's very easy, but but you really need to want to do it. Only then will you learn it. Because I remember I used to spend days and nights watching online tutorials to learn the basics of the camera and the lenses, is what basic 3-point lighting is. Because for 9 hours it wasn't a physical course in a studio, so there was only some literature that I had about what basic lighting is, and what a wide shot is, what a mid shot is. So for me, everything was I learned everything online from YouTube and blogs. um, but it's something that you've kind of got to you have to give it some time. I would say give it at least 1 year before you think you're not able to do it. Don't quit it. It takes time, and it takes a lot of self learning.
Okay. So now I like to ask your present working condition. It means what is the process would you normally follow uh, to do your multimedia story right now when you are working for the China Daily?
Yes. Okay. So for China Daily, I've I'm mostly doing just video, and I personally feel that the multimedia term is kind of misunderstood at times, or can be misunderstood. You're truly doing multimedia journalism only if you're coming back and reporting the story in different formats. Like if you're writing the story, you're getting pictures and doing videos. In my current job, I'm only mostly doing videos of my stories. I work for the documentary team at China Daily, CD Docs. Um, I can talk about my kit first. Would you like me to talk about the kit first or the
Yeah.
workflow first?
No, the kit and then workflow.
Okay. We have a C300 Mark II cinema body Canon. It's an expensive camera. This is the first time I'm actually using a full cinema camera, because until now I had only used DSLRs, mostly just Canon 5D Mark II. Actually, that's the camera I've used for most part of my video career. Uh, but now I'm using the C300. It's a very good camera. We use two Canon Cine lenses. I have a 1880 4.4 f-stop, and then we have a 7200. So it kind of covers your whole range from 18 to 200. That's kind of all we need to shoot a documentary. Then we have a lav mic, a Sennheiser ENG 300, I think. Then we have a special overhead mic, a boom mic. That's a pretty high-end mic. So when we shoot interviews, we use both the mics on two different channels. So, and then for lights, we have two Lupo lights. Like, I think they're 1x1 panels, but they're full RGB and high intensity lights. So these two lights are good enough. And for fill, I usually take my 5-in-1 reflector. And then I mean, that's something I've learned lately, to use a gray card. This is the first time in my career that I've started to use a gray card to get my exposure right, because I'm shooting in C-Log 2 on the cinema camera. So it's a log format. It's a really flat format, and unless you get the exposure right, especially on interviews, your post-production workflow and all your color transformations can be really hard. So it's this camera is quite technical. So I've had to read all. This is the first time in my life that I've read the official documentation and the tests, the technical tests of the cameras that were conducted to understand how to work with such a wide dynamic range and the different, you know, log formats. And then what else? I use a really heavy Manfrotto tripod. I usually carry about five light stands with me. So one light stand is for the boom mic, one light stand is for my key light. Then I always carry a flag kit. So to basically use flags to cut light and shape light when doing the interview. So that's three light stands taken care of. Then I need a fourth one for the backlight, and I keep a fifth one in my kitty because I like to use one layer of diffusion. We have some silks that we use. So we use the key light, which is already slightly diffused, and then we have a silk in front of it to make the light source a little bigger, to make the light softer, and then to diffuse it further. Yeah, uh, yeah, that's pretty much it. But the camera itself has quite a lot of accessories because this camera doesn't have a built-in monitor. So you have an external monitor you need to connect. Then you have to, there's an audio mixer for 2 mics. So that's probably my kit, and I also edit and color it myself. So we use Final Cut Pro here, and so I use FCP, and then my workflow is to sort of shoot, get everything back, ingest it into Final Cut Pro. And because the files are very heavy, you cannot you cannot edit with the high resolution files because your computer is not fast enough. So Final Cut Pro would make proxies for those files, and I would typically leave it overnight to make proxies. So that's part of the workflow. And then after I have edited something, I'll push it out to DaVinci Resolve to fix the color, to color correct and kind of color grade. I mean, I'm not a colorist, but like I said, I've been doing a lot of online learning for the last few months, so I know some basics. And so then we use DaVinci Resolve to finalize the video. That's really the production workflow. But in pre-production, we of course go out for recce's to this to this to the locations. We do a lot of pre-interviews before we go out to shoot. We have a rough idea of what's our story, and then you have to speak to characters, find the right characters, line up interviews. So for a 10-minute doc, you would typically need about a week to be able to shoot everything. But I know a lot of international companies would take a lot of time to prep and line up their interviews so that they can shoot the whole thing in 2 or 3 days. So, but those shoot days are really long. But these are shoots where a crew travels, so they want to save on costs. So they want to do it quickly. In our case, I'm just shooting out of Hong Kong right now, so I can stretch it over a week. Is there something you think I need to answer more?
So you just mentioned about the Reiki, that what is the importance of making a story uh, in terms of Reiki? Because some people think that, oh, I don't need these things, so when I go, I can find someone. So how important to you for as a Reiki? It means to find out the story
So you
or the character.
so you mean Reki to go and speak to people, or Reki to see the location?
Location and speak to the people, both.
Um, See, you can do your pre-interviews over the phone. That's fine, but not always. Like we're doing one documentary for next month. And a lot of the characters are actually people who work on roadsides and have small shops, and they might be old, so they won't speak to you over the phone. So, one journalist has to first go and talk to the person and prep him or her up and take the permission and sort of just do a pre-interview. Otherwise, you can do it over the phone, but we would never go to interview somebody without actually having done a pre-interview or some kind of introduction, either over the phone or over email. We'd like, we'd like to know if, what's the character's backstory, because you can't really start an interview without really knowing how your character fits in your story, because otherwise you run the risks, two big risks. One is you end up not asking the right questions, right? And the other big risk is the speaker would end up speaking for 1 hour, and then you don't know where to cut from it, because you're going to make it into a 5 minute or a 10 minute video. And if you interview 5 people and you have 5 hours of footage, then you're going to have a hard time in structuring your story. So you need to know, because your story is going to have multiple elements, you need to know which character fits which element. So you need to do your, and that's really part of the pre-production process. You don't go out to shoot without understanding your story, understanding where my character fits in, and then speaking to the character and telling them about what your story is and what is it that you think that they might add to the story. Because they're kind of, many times they're confused. They're like, I mean, recently I shot something, and I remember the character I was interviewing, after doing the 15-minute interview and having set up all the lights and all for about 1 hour, she was like, you're just going to make a 5-minute video. Why did you interview me for 15 minutes and spent 1 hour in setting up your lights? So they can be a bit confused and overwhelmed. You also have to tell them beforehand, like, I'll be coming with a huge kit. We'll be 2 people. We'll have 5 big bags. Because what happens is you can, and this happened with me once. I spoke to a character and I said, look, I want to interview you. And I did the, pre-interview. I said, and he was still well. And
Yeah.
when I actually, and he said, yes, he said, only yesterday, one TV crew had come and interviewed him. So I went over with like 5 bags and lights and everything. And he met me at the hotel lobby and he said, oh, you have so much equipment. I mean, the guy who came yesterday just shot me with his mobile phone. So we just sat in the lobby and nobody noticed that we shot. And whereas in my case, the moment I walked into the hotel, the front desk stopped me to say, what's all this? What do you want to do? I ended up not shooting the interview that day because the hotel didn't allow. I didn't have any space. So that's why it's really important to speak to your character, not just for the story, but just also for the logistics, and tell them, look, the interview is going to last for 10 minutes. I'll have lights, I'll have one person on the camera, I'll ask the question. So you kind of have to massage the character before you reach. Otherwise, your character won't open up. I talk about a 13-minute doc that I did when I was with Hindustan Times. And this was a story about militants in Kashmir taking to social media and trying to, putting out their videos and photos without any masks. We wanted to investigate what was happening because, that was something new. So the story was actually, it was the idea of our investigations editor. And she and I traveled to Kashmir from Delhi alone. We were there for 4 days, and we did about 6 to 7 interviews. We went to meet the families. So I handled all the production and post-production alone. I carried 2 cameras with me. At Hindustan Times, then we were using Nikon cameras. And so it was really the first time I was traveling with, not really the first time, but this is the first time I was carrying a lot of equipment. So I carried 2 camera bodies. I carried three, 4 lenses. Then I'd also bought a Steadicam. So I even carried that. I was carrying 2 tripods, 2 set of lav mics, and that was a time when I was not using lights. But even without all that, and then of course your memory cards, because I wanted to go with a lot of storage because we were shooting for 5 days and we were shooting for full days. So I didn't know if I would have time to sort of shoot in the morning and then come back to the hotel to transfer all the stuff and format and empty my cards. So you have to prepare for all of that. You have to you have to ascertain how how many SD cards you need, and how many batteries you need before you set out. So it was a lot of equipment to carry actually, but it was an important story, so I carried all of it. I think it took me about 2 or 3 days to just prep the equipment. But I would say this: the biggest challenge when you start out to shoot video, if you have not done it before, is you're just struggling with how to operate the camera. You think you know it, but when you're on the location, and because things are moving fast, the interview is about to start, and you figure out that your white balance is out, and then you're just struggling and working with the buttons on the body to figure out how to set the white balance, because you forget it, you know and there are so many things that could go wrong. So I think the first lesson is to be comfortable with the equipment you use, and spend a week, take it out, shoot some random shots, try to see if you know where all the important settings are. And then also, because when you're shooting a documentary and when you're alone, things are moving fast. You need to know the right buttons for changing the aperture, and getting the right exposure, and the ISO, because you can't be struggling with the equipment while you're on location. And this has happened with me a lot of times, and to be honest, this still happens with me. Not saying that you will be able to solve this problem forever, but there is a good chance that if you're not comfortable with your equipment, you'll goof up on the shoot, because there is a lot of pressure on the shoot, because only you know that you're starting out. The person you're interviewing and your own colleague doesn't know that you're just learning the body and the art of doing video. So the first thing is to just spend time with your equipment, and especially when you're going to shoot something important, don't take it. You will be tempted to take new equipment. Oh, let me try this. It's an important story. Let me take a gimbal. So I took a Steadicam with me, and I had kind of practiced how to stabilize it and how to use it, but I hadn't really ever shot on location with it. It was a pretty heavy bag, and I took it. And I remember I spent the whole night in the hotel room trying to balance it well, and I ended up not using it at all. But I took it out of excitement. So this can happen with you with any set of equipment. So don't be over ambitious. Only use stuff that you know very well how to use. And then the other important thing is that once when you actually go out to a shoot, and especially one in which you don't have the comfort of coming back to office at the end of the day and sorting out everything. If you're out for 4 or 5 days, the big trouble is if you don't have your workflow right, you'll have big problems prepping your equipment for the next day. So for instance, you shoot the whole day, you come back to your hotel room at 9, you're tired, and the only thing you can think of is just sleeping, because the next morning you have to get up at 5 to get your morning light. But before that, you need to charge your phone. You need to take out all your cards. You need to transfer all of them on at least 2 backups. And then you need to format those cards. Then you need to charge your camera batteries. And if you don't think of these things before you leave, you'll have problem, because if you're carrying, let's say if you have 2 cameras and you're carrying 4 batteries, you need to be sure that once you reach a hotel at 9 o'clock and you want to sleep, it's better if you arrange for 4 chargers, because if you have only 2 chargers, then you won't get enough sleep, because you'll have to wake up to change your batteries at night, right? So these are small things that you need to prep in advance. You don't foresee these things because you're too bothered about which camera will I use. I'll get good depth of field, I'll make this shot, I'll get the morning light, I'll shoot a time lapse. But on location, you figure out that you mess up with these small things, it kind of upsets the whole day. So you've got to get that workflow right. And then once you pack up all your stuff, you need to be sure that it's good if your colleague offers to hold some stuff for you. But like in broadcast news, if you're a reporter, you know that you have to carry the mic with you, and then the tripod and the camera person would carry. Here, if you're a one-man band, you're expected to carry everything yourself. And especially, I also shot stuff when I didn't have a reporter. I was the reporter also, on that video. So I had to report. I had to ask the questions, and especially there have been times when I've shot with 2 cameras, I've done an interview with a wide and a close-up shot, and I've set both the cameras, and then I have sat down to interview. So I've done that also, and those are the trickiest because you want to focus on the interview and asking the right questions and listening to the answers so that you can ask the right cross questions. But at the back of your mind, you're worried: is my camera still rolling? Did I press the record button? Is the battery off? Is the focus right? So you have to think of all these things. And these days, if I would prefer, if I'm shooting alone and I'm interviewing somebody, I set up the camera, and it's better if you take a long HDMI cable and have a field monitor in your hand. So at least you're comfortable that you've got the right frame and everything is still recording. But that's, of course, I mean, you'll figure it out. But I think my with this, you have to know your equipment well and each part of your equipment very well, right? You might realize you've carried everything and you forgot the base plate of your tripod, and then you're gone because you can't shoot interviews with it, right? So you prep your equipment well. You understand your story first. What is it you're going to shoot? Do you need two cameras? Do you need one camera? And then once you've done that, you have to figure out if you can carry both the cameras. So be practical on what all you can carry, right? And once you've done that, then you figure out your workflow. From day to evening, you have to figure out your workflow while you're shooting. And once you're back from the shoot, what's your workflow to transfer all your footage, to have backups, and then to format it and be ready for the next day. So I would say these are the two most important things. And of course, you have to think of the story, because when you start out, and I think this is where a lot of people struggle when they start out, and I did myself too, is understanding what B-roll is. When you go out, and this was one of my biggest worries when I would shoot a video, when I had only shifted from print to digital. My big worry was, this is a 5-minute video. Do I have enough footage? And till date, I'm still worried whether I have enough footage to fill in the video. And when I started off, in the name of B-roll, you'll just take random shots because you have only half an hour on location, and you're worried to capture a lot of shots so that you can slap them on the interviews in post-production. And you don't think about, whether this B-roll is relevant to what the guy is speaking and what my story is. And then also, you forget your basic sequencing: wide, mid, tight, wide, mid, tight, wide, mid, tight. There are times if you don't think of, let's say, a wide shot, you're on location, you're quickly taking close-ups with a lot of depth of field, and you feel these shots are very artistic. When you come back on the edit table, you realize that you don't have an establishing shot of the location. So these are kind of things that what I used to do is
sometimes it is very difficult to, when you are start editing, in
Yeah.
that point it is very valid point that think when you are shooting, because when you back can't take uh, the second chance to reshoot in some location, you
Yeah.
can't go there. So
Yeah.
that's very important point. So
Yeah.
okay.
So I think my tip would be, when you're starting, just make a note of, just make a short list when you're going in the morning, right? You know what the location is. I'm going to interview let's say you're going to interview a government official. You're going to interview him in his office. So be sure that when you reach there, make a short list, take an establishing shot of the building, take an establishing shot of the board that says, what building this is. Then you go in, take a sequence of the guy or the girl working on the computer, right? Take a wide shot of the room, establishing him inside the room, and take a mid shot. I used to break it down more like science when I started out, not really artistically. So I would say that anything I will shoot a wide, mid, and tight, wide, mid, and tight. It was almost like a formula in my head. So at least, I was covering all the bases, like the basic ones. So at least I'll have leverage when I'm editing. So I'll shoot, let's say I'll ask somebody to work on the computer, take a wide, I'll go mid, I'll take the person waist up with the keyboard mouse. Then I'll take two close-ups, one of the fingers on the keyboard, then one of the monitor and one of their eye, and one on the mouse. Then I have 6 shots. I can at least make a 15-second sequence, right? So I will break down my video like this. Look, this video, I need B-roll for 1 minute. Let's break it down. I need one sequence I will do 15-second sequences. So I'll do 4 sequences for 1 minute. Each sequence will have 4 shots. And so I used to break it down when I used to go out. Well, of course, once you start doing it, then you don't, I mean, people still need a shot list, but at least, once you're more comfortable that you will not go back with insufficient shots, then you start thinking creatively. Then you start thinking of, oh, can I make this frame look better? Can I change the kind of establishing shots that I take? Can I change my point of view on the establishing shots? But that is, that's a learning curve. Start with the basics, get your basics right, start getting the right shots. Is think of everything, go and shoot random shots, like one shot of a person typing, then one shot of them reading a book. Makes no sense when you put it in post-production. So my advice would be, the more you can think of this logically when you're starting off, then artistically, better. Because I've seen a lot of journalists, just college freshers who've done their video courses, not just print journalists who move to digital, but first time journalists moving from colleges. They don't understand sequencing. They will just go and they'll take beautiful shots, but one shot will not speak to the other shot. It's not a natural progression. So you can't tell a story. And I think that's the most common problem I see with a lot of people. So get a plan in your head when you're going to shoot. Write down where you're going to go, what shots. Visualize the shots a bit in your head. Make some kind of flow, wide, mid, tight, wide. Everything you're shooting, just think in your head, say wide, mid, tight, and that'll help you when you start out.
So, Ravi, tell me some experience from your experience, and that about the how you conduct the interview during the shooting, and how you think that which one is first, interview or b-roll, or b-roll or interview, and what is your
Uh,
process to deal with this two stuff?
and so even till date, my process is that when I first walk into the room, I won't take out my camera or anything. I'll just sit down with the character for 5 to 10 minutes, saying hi, hello, pleasantries, and trying to explain your story, who you are. Because if you walk into a room and straight take out your camera, you kind of overwhelm the character. And there are a lot of people who are camera shy. So you first need to break the ice, be informal with them, and then I always film the interview first. I always shoot the B-roll later, but there are different schools of thought on this. A lot of people say, just go and take some B-roll first and let the character be at ease and then start the interview. But I always do the interview first and I take the B-roll later. For the interview, the most important thing is you have to understand that it's not a conversation, it's an interview, and especially for print journalists. And I came from print background, right? When you're going and meeting your source, you're in a habit of sort of, oh yeah. You talk with the interviewer when they say something, because you kind of want to look that you're very interested and you're into the conversations. So you start replying, oh yeah, I know that. So this is not a conversation. And when you start out from print to video, you will always have this problem. You'll have interviews where you're also speaking. You don't want that. So you must know that you can only nod or smile. You can't talk when somebody's answering. You let them complete their answers first. And then uh, the biggest tip, or rather the rule of asking the questions, is never ask close-ended questions. Always ask open-ended questions. So never say, do you think you did the right thing? They might just say, yeah, I think I did the right thing. Okay, so that's a close-ended question. You have no answer there, right? You have to say, you did this at that event. What do you think about what you did? And then you're forcing them to give a quality answer, right? And so use a lot of in your frame your questions in a way where you're forcing them to open up, to say, how do you feel about taking up this new job? That's the person has to think about this, because you've framed the questions in a way that they can't just give you a short answer. How do you feel means you're talking about their emotions. And so try to get the facts. Of course you need the facts in an interview, but try to dig deeper and try to get the emotion. What were the emotions that drove their actions? And it might seem very easy, but you'll be surprised if you don't prep well, if you don't frame your questions well, your interview can end up being very dull.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be helpful to our a new student. And the last one is about your memorable stories. Uh, if you want to tell
Yeah.
something about your memorable stories and shorts, or why it is memorable in that point, that you should lot of
I would
stories in
say
your.
my um, well, there are you like different stories in your career because of different reasons, right? There are, as a video journalist, there are some stories you like for the for the cinematography. You think that you shot them really well, right? There are some stories you think you edited very well, and then there are some stories in which you say that just the story was strong enough. I don't care how the shots were, but the story was so good. So I would say that one of my most memorable would be the story that I just spoke about, the Kashmir story, because this was the first time I actually traveled out of my base location for 4 to 5 days, all alone with my camera and my equipment. And I think that was the first time I took shots that I really liked. So when you're a print journalist, right, like me, you've already reported for some time, so you know what a good story is, and you had that satisfaction of a byline, and having broken the story or something that forced the government to make some changes. So you already have that satisfaction. The first instant gratification you're looking for when you move to video is, are my shots looking good? Because that's the first feedback you get from peers. Oh, that's a great shot. How did you take that shot? The colors look nice. This looks so well. So the first kind of reward that you look for when you just start out in video is, for somebody to say, the shots look great. And then and then slowly, when as you so in my case, that was the story that I did in Kashmir. I really liked the way I shot it. It wasn't perfect. The interviews were, some of them were not well lit, some of them were not perfectly framed, but okay, I got a lot of very good b-roll. um, and then there were stories that I did. I mean, there were quite a few, to be honest, that I liked for the editing of it. And I just did one very recently in Hong Kong on a recent fire at a Nepalese restaurant. So it was a story on the minorities. Uh, I like that story because this is the first time, I kind of feel that this is the next big step for me as a video journalist, from having used DSLR cameras for long to the first time having used a cinema camera. And because I used a cinema camera, I had to do a lot of research trying to understand, what dynamic range is, and how to set exposure. So I've learned a lot of stuff, and the shots that I got were pretty good, very nice. So that gave me the satisfaction of actually graduating as a cinematographer. I mean, if I can say that. But uh, so these so just but if I had to pick one, I would definitely pick my Kashmir story, because the story was very strong, and we shot it in very tough conditions. We traveled a lot and had a lot of gear. The first time I was using two cameras all alone. So that, I would say, would be.
That's all from my side. If you want to add something, you can share your experience to our students. If you want to add something.
Well, so the students in this course are students who are college graduates, or or practicing journalists.
It depends. Most of them would be from the photographer. So, as you know, in my school is a photography school, but now they
Okay.
are learning
Okay.
the videography. So,
Yeah. So there's a big debate on who are easier to train, reporters or photographers. Train in videos, right? Uh, because photographers already know the camera. They already know the art of photography, framing, lighting, and color. They know everything. So you would expect them to find it far easier to graduate to video, right? And I've noticed, because when I was at Hindustan Times, we also trained photographers to shoot videos, and these were really seasoned, award-winning photographers, excellent pictures, right? But they would go out and shoot without a lav mic, and you would have a hard time explaining to them that, you have to use a collar mic, because they would be like, it's a great image. Look, it's looking so good. I've got you an interview. I've done this. This is an extra job that I've done. I already took pictures, but I went the extra mile to get you a video. Now you don't appreciate it. So, we had a tough time explaining photographers the whole workflow and the whole technology that you use to make videos is very different. It's the one thing I'll say is it's not something that you can do easily. Even if you're a reporter, if you're a writer, if you go out, you know your main job is to get enough quotes and enough stuff to write out a story. But at the same time, you also have to shoot interviews and take b-roll. So it's not an easy job. It's not something that will come naturally. Even if you're a photographer, you'll find framing easy, but you need to understand the devices video journalists use to tell a story visually, and also in the story structure. um, Yeah, I've seen a lot of, actually, on the contrary, I've seen a lot of writers who have moved to video far easily than full-time photographers who have moved to video. And I always find it very hard. I don't know why, because they have everything they need. Like, they understand photography, they understand light, they understand the camera. They're all artistic in some way. I think they're visually artistic, as opposed to writers who's artistic in how they write. Um, but I do find that a lot of the photographers don't take the time to understand the small technical details of shooting a video, even as something as basic as the frame rate and shutter, because using the shutter is very different for a photographer, right? You can use any shutter speed depending on, you're shooting a fast moving race car, you can crack up your shutter speed. You want nice motion blur, you lower your shutter speed, right? In video, your shutter speed has to be at 180-degree angles. It has to be double your frame rate. And that's also something, it's something that, you'll have to go back. You have to go back and learn everything. You can't expect to graduate smoothly without really putting in the time and patience to learn the technology and the art of telling a story in the video format.
But from my side, as a teacher, as a trainer, I learned from that I'm totally agree with you, because the RVGN, Rural Visual Journalism Network, DJ, and I work with this project from 2011, and that
Yeah,
time initially we select 10 photographer for the multimedia journalist, but with that only two become successful. But
yeah,
after that, we realized that we will choose the reporter, not the
yeah,
photographer. So
yeah.
out of 20, almost 12 are still working with us.
Yeah, I can
That's
tell you. I
the
mean, yeah,
findings we
there,
got from our last project.
yes, and I think I know. I mean, I can guess. A lot of photographers are a little underconfident of their language skills. I mean, that at least used to happen when I used to work in English newspaper. So they constantly think of themselves as I can't write. I can't write a story. I can't write a script. I can just shoot a video. I can just shoot visuals. And then they're also so much in love with photography, because that has its own romance. That's a very different visual storytelling medium. So I think in their head, video might be, they might be weighing still photography and video when they think of video, and they go back to photography because they like stills. But for writers who have never used a camera, who've never done photography, for them, that's not a decision. That's not a hard decision to make. They just take to video very quickly. But I do remember that when I was working with Indian Express, and a lot of photographers, the newspaper photographers, were being asked to get B-roll footage from whatever stories they shoot. They used to get people who have never shot videos, beautiful shots. So they would feel that these are great shots, but I can't put them together to make one solid story, because the shots are they're not connected to each other. They are great frames and great compositions, but they don't speak to each other to kind of make a full story. So if photographers can really put their heart into learning what a story is, what's the beginning, middle, and end, Because for a lot of photographers who shoot like photo essays, they think of a story in a very different way as opposed to when you write a script, the beginning, middle, and end. So the photographers will definitely have to think hard about the flow of a story, the elements of a story, because I think visually it's not very difficult. And of course, they will have to learn sequencing, wide, mid, tight, because in the photography language, they don't have to do that. Like, not very often.
Robbie, there's another point that for the general student who are not decided to what they are going to be. So, do you have any advice to them to become a video journalist?
Okay. I think there are two parts to this: video and journalist. Um, I think the jury is still out on what it takes to be a journalist. Okay. I mean, you have your professional courses that teach you journalism, and I think it's a very good option because this kind of ground you well in the in the theory of journalism, and they sort of you plant your feet on a firm ground. But that said, you these days, you have a lot of you have a lot of bloggers who are not professional journalists, but they're still telling great stories because you've got to remember, there are political stories, but there are also human interest stories. A lot of great work on storytelling, especially the feature stories and human interest stories, is coming from many times non-journalists. So even if you're a documentary filmmaker, you kind of fall in the category of a storyteller. So I mean, doing a course is definitely great, but that's not the only way to get into storytelling. You could start out on your own, find great stories, and these days the whole process is so democratized that you can have your own channel and start putting out great stuff, right? But that said, if you learn video, then that's an added strength, because that's even in mainstream journalism, while people are trying to upskill themselves and learn video, there is still space for people who are very good with camera and very good with the art of storytelling in a visual format. And maybe if you're great, if you shoot great videos, then you can work with a practicing journalist, because then you're actually working on stories as a cinematographer, as a shooter, and maybe even an editor. And then you can learn the the tricks and tips of journalism while you work with a senior journalist on the field. I know a lot of young students who 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 studied their postgraduate degrees in video storytelling, and they're now working with very seasoned international journalists. So they're working as fixers, shooters, and producers, but they're working alongside these great journalists. And when you just work with them on one story, two stories, you kind of learn a lot of what journalism is and what good storytelling is. So one way is, of course, going to a journalism school, but the other way is to just kind of become good at using the camera and telling a visual story, and then work with journalists together as a team. And then you can pick up your skill, you can hone your skills as a videographer, and also learn journalism as you go. And then you can kind of branch out to doing your independent stories, because there is a lot of freelance work that comes through from international companies, especially if you're, let's say, if you're in South Asia. Many international publications don't have bureaus in this part of the world, so they rely heavily on local freelancers to shoot stories that are of interest and importance to the West. So you have a lot of scope, even if you don't have a journalistic background, and you still know how to operate the camera and shoot great images and do good sequencing. Then you can you still have a foot in the door, and you can then work with journalists to ease your way into journalism. So there are quite a few options on how to get into journalism, and going to a journalism school is definitely not the only one.
Yeah, yeah, I do agree with you because I'm a photographer and the videographer also. So
Yeah.
I could understand this point and totally agree with you. And thank you, Ravi, for your time and for your to learn from you and uh, listen your experience about your stories and your journey. And thank to Patshala.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. I'm happy to share my experience. Um, I think I'll just say, to end this, I'll just say that it's a fascinating field. It's difficult, but it's very rewarding. So I think just don't give up in the first few weeks or first few months. Just be at it, and you will get it eventually.